going to give us a Unity magazine review. Welcome back, Diane. Now you need to unmute. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill, and good morning, everybody. I'm here to review the latest, well, it's not actually the latest, it's the September-October magazine, which at one point got a bit lost in the mail, but we've been given another copy. And this edition is the self-empowerment theme for that month. The main article is an interview with this fellow here, Justin Michael Williams. He's a young American man. He was born into poverty and violence in the States, but he's managed to work his way out of that actually through yoga and meditation, which he was fortunate to come across in his teens. He's just written a book called Stay Woke, a meditation guide for the rest of us. Now, for those of us who aren't up with the term woke, it actually means to be alert to racial and social injustice. And when he says a meditation guide for the rest of us, he's meaning those who have never been exposed to meditation before and generally come from marginalized communities. So he's spreading the word further out there. He has come from a background of traditional meditation, which he supports. So he believes that love, light, kindness and compassion are all very important. But he also believes that we should bring in awareness of the darkness as well as the light. He calls his meditation freedom meditation. He gets his students to imagine their everyday self and then their highest self, which he finds for them is quite transformative because they're generally sort of stuck in a fairly sort of negative view of themselves and the world. And then he asks them to fill that gap between the higher and lower selves with a mantra. And for him, for example, he used a mantra, complete authenticity, for himself for some time. And that sort of brought that through for him. He has some practices which perhaps are a little different to what we're used to. For example, he says, you don't necessarily have to stay still while you're meditating. If you want to scratch your nose, it's better to scratch your nose than to sit there thinking about scratching your nose. Or if thoughts come up, just to let them come up and then go, not to fight them or worry about them. He takes quite a practical approach, and he asks us to, for example, recognize when we're having what he calls toxic thoughts and beliefs. He also asks us to think about asking ourselves questions, because he believes, as we do, that all the answers are within. But he believes there are high quality and low quality questions. The low quality questions generally start with why. For example, why is life so hard? Why is this happening to me? He doesn't feel they get very far, but he likes the higher quality questions such as how? How can I make the world a better place? How can I step up more fully into my passion and purpose? So he's quite a practical man. And at the moment, he's touring the States in marginalized areas and giving workshops, and he gives his students free copies of his book. Another article in this magazine is by a lady which some of you will recognize already. Her name is Anita Moorjani. You can hardly see her down there. But she is the lady who wrote a book called Dying to Be Me. So she's an Indian lady who grew up in Hong Kong. She went to a school where she was only one of 2 dark-skinned students. So she felt very different and rather inferior because of her dark skin, because she felt different and all her beliefs and cultural practices were so different. she felt she had become a positive person, but really she realizes now that's simply because she was trying to please people because she felt so inferior. She had a terrible fear growing up of cancer too. And then especially when her best friend and her brother-in-law both died of cancer, and she went through that journey with them. And so she developed this enormous fear of it. And in fact, that's what she did, contract herself. So in her book, Dying to Be Me, she describes getting to stage 4, going into a coma in ICU, being in that for 30 hours, and then having this extraordinary experience, which she now calls a near-death experience. During that time, she came to the realization that we need to love and accept all of ourselves, all parts of ourselves, not just the nice bits, not the bits that we just like, but the bits that we don't like, the bits we might be ashamed of. And she says, if you feel negative parts or negative about parts of yourself, don't fear or suppress those feelings. Just allow them to come up. Try to love and accept them all, because she says self-love ultimately is the most important thing. If we don't love ourselves, it's very difficult to love anyone else or the world. By self-love, she says, look, it's not really about massages and hairdos, although they are nice, but it's about doing things that make you feel joy and give you great satisfaction. She says it's important for us not to do things to be liked or out of fear or to impress people, but to be aware enough to know that we're actually doing them because they feel right. Somehow they're in alignment with our deepest inner self. She also feels it's about having boundaries and standing up for yourself. She's also written a second book, which I have here, called What If This Is Heaven? And she's quite a practical lady. And she decides to look at different myths that we have been told in our lives and just to examine those. Are they really true? For example, you get what you deserve. Loving yourself is selfish. Love means that anything goes. Excuse me. And she's quite a practical person, like Justin. For example, in her marriage, she says, since she's had her near-death experience, she and her husband have made the decision never to criticize each other and never to go to bed while feeling angry with each other. So I suppose these are sort of things we can think about and maybe even practice. Now, another article in this magazine is by a man called Dawson Church, who some of you are familiar with. And this is his latest book, Bliss Brain. And that's what the article is called. But this article is not concentrating on the individual's experience in meditation. It's looking at the collective experience. And he actually talks about evolution and how it proceeds very, very slowly. For example, biological evolution, in the case of the first life forms in oceans becoming mammals, took 1 billion years. There's also the evolution of consciousness, rising in consciousness. And he says that this form of evolution can take, or so can the biological type too, they can take evolutionary leaps. If there is enough momentum or critical mass, it can actually move very quickly. And he's very hopeful that that is what's happening to us at the moment or about to happen. He gives the example of between 2012 and 2017, the number of medical practitioners in the West tripled. Now, if you put that together with all those who are meditating in the East, which has been happening for very many years, he believes we are reaching a critical mass when massive changes could take place in religion, society, art, and culture. So perhaps at the moment we're going through the storm before the calm. And lastly, another article is called The Meaning of Suffering. This article is written by a Unity ministerial student. She had been through some great difficulties in her life. And she found during her ministerial training, where they all shared these difficulties, that she wasn't alone. So that helped her enormously. She also drew on the book of Job, which, as we know, describes the great suffering of Job, but his coming through and being restored to wholeness. And lastly, this magazine actually describes the New Thought Walden Awards and tells us who actually won this year. So this is the third year that these awards have been awarded. I know some of you are very interested in them, and there are 20 honorees worldwide who've been honoured for their participation and the great effects that they've had in the New Thought world. So thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you very much, Diane. That was great. They're a great magazine, and it was a joy to see it arrive, the two of them, even though they're older editions, and we anticipate a great year of magazines this year and look forward to your wonderful way of illuminating them for us.